There's a couple more editing tools or displays on this on the main panel here, which I will just mention. There's not much more to say really, but they can be could be useful to you. Mainly along this black strip just below the main tools bar. If you click on this one here, this refers to what you can see in the editing window that the tracks will display. And in fact, much of it duplicates what's in the mixer display. So you'll notice if you look down the list, you'll see there's the comments view isn't shown, but the inserts view is. The sends A to E and sends F to J are these two here. If you can see my cursor on the right hand side of the screen, the I/O is this one here, and so on. So you basically, if you choose those ones, you're just duplicating those within this within the editing window. So that might be useful to you or not. There is a comments view as well, which you might find useful for writing in information about your tracks. I haven't seen anybody use that, but you might. The next grid or menu or ruler view selector, it says. I mentioned earlier that these seem quite redundant, some of them. You might want a tempo control if you're working with beats, for example, but and possibly, I suppose, a meter control if you're working with multiple meters. But the key probably less likely, considering you're not working in MIDI, or you won't be at the moment. And markers, well, who knows. So any of these that you don't want, if you can deselect in this view here, which I think removes quite a lot of clutter, and in fact gives you more screen real estate for your tracks. If I remove that, that gives you at least one more track. Ooh. So in fact, if I remove samples, that one will go as well. So depending on what you need to be visible, you can either keep them or remove them. There are a couple of tools up here. I confess I don't know what all of them do because I've never had cause to use them. They are slightly more esoteric commands. The one thing that I would show you is this one here, link, timeline and edit selection. In one of my comments earlier, I said that if you place the cursor or the selector tool anywhere within, just click it, it starts to flash, that becomes your playback point. So if you press play, and one thing I haven't already mentioned, although hopefully you figured it out already, if you press the space bar, that will start and stop playback. So if I press that, playback starts from slightly before that that marker. The reason it's slightly before and not on it is because we have pre-roll on at the moment, which I'll come back to in just a minute. So wherever I place it will start from that, essentially that point. If I deselect this this link, timeline and edit selection button, then that becomes decoupled. So if I press the cursor, I will still find that playback occurs back here where I originally had it. Okay, so wherever I place the cursor, it's just going to ignore it. It's just going to flash away, but it's not going to have any impact on where playback starts. If I want to change back where playback starts, then I need to move. I need to place the cursor within the timeline area, and you'll notice that little blue marker moves, and now that will actually dictate where the playback starts. So depending on your preference, if you work in something like Cubase or Nuendo, you might find that it's rather irritating that wherever you place your cursor, playback starts up. So you might want to turn that mode off. But I'm used to having it on, so I'll leave it on. Going back to this business of the pre-roll, you can change that within the transport control window. So if I go to window and choose transport control here, the transport control comes up, and here you have pre-roll and post-roll. I mean, basically all the transport controls here are going to be fairly generic. You'll be familiar with what all of them do. Pre-roll and post-roll basically gives you a small pre-roll into the up to the point that you specify as your starting point for your playback. So at the moment it's 0.743 milliseconds, which sorry, seconds, which seems somewhat arbitrary. So what we might want to make that 1 second, and that means that every time I play back, it will play back from 1 second in. And similarly, you can have a post roll. So if I made a selection that goes from here to there, I could also have a post roll of, say, 2 seconds. And that would mean that I would always have, oops, sorry. Right, there you go. You'll notice that you get little green flags up here which tell you how long the pre-roll and post-roll is, and that means that when I do press play, it goes from those, goes through those points. Although in fact post-roll didn't stop it anyway. But you can turn off pre-roll and post-roll, in which case you notice the green flags go transparent, if you like, they're no longer green, and at that point it starts from the point that you press. It looks like you can move these transport. Yes, you can. That's something that's new. Well, I think it is. You can move the pre-roll and post-roll flags as well. So if that's useful to you, you can do that. Other than that, I don't think there's a great deal that you will probably want to know at this point. You notice that up here you've got a cursor and a waveform display in terms of where your cursor is in relation to time and amplitude space, which is vertical space. I talked about the grid value drop-down menu earlier. You also have a nudge value drop-down, which enables you to, it operates in exactly the same way. So if you remember, this bit down here is a menu that dictates what time values you're working in. So you can have minutes or seconds, or you can have bars and beats. So if I change to bars and beats, all the bits at the top here, which are the time values, will change. So if I go bars and beats, now we go to note values. The difference between grid and nudge is that grid will dictate the grid spacings for the sort of snap values, if you like, for your sound file or your regions. So when you move them, they jump to start point on one of the grid lines. The nudge values, there is a nudge command which I believe is plus and minus, and that nudge, if you press shift plus and shift minus, we'll try that in a minute, will nudge the sounds, whatever value you specified here, either forward or backwards. If I go half note there and then drag in my file, oops, hello. Oh, it's because I'm in shuffle mode. Turn it to slip mode. So if you press the plus and the minus keys in the number on the number pad of your keyboard, then pressing plus will nudge it forward by a specified amount. Minus will nudge it backwards by a specified amount, and that specified amount is obviously here, where you specify 1 second or 500 milliseconds or whatever. So that will make it jump a smaller amount. So you might want to use that.